decades of silence end today as I, Emily Warren, finally unveil the narrative that has simultaneously shaped my identity and delivered life's most agonizing lesson. Genuine affection differs profoundly from its counterfeit.
I want to pause for a moment. If you feel the love and are still listening to my story, please subscribe and hit the like button on the Grandparents Memories channel to show your support. Thank you so much.
Those who encountered my younger self would have witnessed an idealistic young woman with luminous eyes and vulnerable optimism. I harbored romantic notions inspired by literary classics, cinematic portrayals, and lyrical ballads streaming through popular media platforms. My aspirations were straightforward yet profound: an authentic romance, a fulfilling partnership, a serene existence alongside someone offering unwavering devotion. Then Jason Miller materialized in my world. His entrance resembled a subtle atmospheric shift, almost mystical in nature. Jason defied ordinary categorization. He possessed exceptional qualities. His repertoire included precisely calibrated words, meaningful glances, and an uncanny ability to engage a woman's deepest emotional vulnerabilities. The circumstances of our initial meeting remain crystallized in my memory. An autumn afternoon bathed Jefferson Park, Chicago, in October's golden light as I sat absorbed in my electronic reading device. My concentration broke with the awareness of an approaching presence. "Miss, I hope I'm not bothering you, but I've walked by here 3 times just to build up the courage to talk to you." I looked up and saw this tall man with a half smile and eyes full of mischief and sweetness at the same time. My fingers trembled as I closed my e-reader. "Oh no, you're not bothering me," I replied. He smiled that smile I'll never forget. I couldn't decide what was more beautiful, watching you read or watching you look at me now. I laughed, a shy but sincere laugh. No one had ever spoken to me that way. No one had ever looked at me the way he looked at me. The conversation started there, and before I realized it, we had spent hours talking about everything. He was charming, knew how to listen, knew how to touch my soul with every word. Days passed, and Jason made a point of finding me. He knew where I worked, where I liked to walk, and as if by chance, he always appeared in the right places at the right times, with that smile that made my heart beat faster. "You're the most beautiful woman I've ever seen, Emily," he would say. "One day I'm going to make you my wife." I laughed, finding his boldness amusing, but deep down, that idea was growing inside me. Jason had something special. He was confident, self-assured, strong. He made me feel protected. Months passed and love blossomed. I gave myself completely, without reservations, without doubts. When he asked me to be his girlfriend, I accepted immediately. When he proposed marriage, I didn't hesitate. Our June wedding, 5 years ago, was the most beautiful day of my life. The church, St. Mary's Church in Chicago, was full. All eyes were on us. My mother, Martha Warren, cried with emotion. My friends sighed seeing this man so in love by my side. "I promise to love you, care for you, protect you," he whispered in my ear, holding my hand tightly. And I believed him. I believed every word. At first, life with Jason was a dream. He treated me like a queen, took care of every detail, did everything to make me happy. I remember our first trip together. He took me to Santa Monica Beach, California. We walked hand in hand on the sand, and he said, "I'll never let go of your hand, Emily. I'm the luckiest man in the world to have you." And I felt like the most loved woman in the world. But time passed, and Jason began to change. At first, it was small things. The way he looked at me when I took a little longer to come home. The insistent questions about who had spoken to me. "You're different," he would say. "Are you sure you're not hiding anything from me?" I laughed, finding it funny. "Jason, you're silly." "Of course not." But he didn't laugh. He stayed serious. his gaze fixed as if trying to read my soul. Then came moments when he would stay silent for hours without saying why. When I asked what had happened, he would respond dryly, "Nothing." But I felt something was wrong. The first clear sign came at a family gathering. I was talking with my husband's colleague from work when Jason approached and grabbed my arm firmly. "I think it's time for us to leave." There was a tone in his voice I didn't recognize, a cold tone that sent a chill through me. That night when we got home, he looked at me in a way he never had before. "Do you think I'm an idiot? I saw how you were looking at him." I was speechless. "Jason, for God's sake, he's your colleague." He laughed, but it wasn't a laugh of happiness. It was a cold laugh, loaded with something I didn't understand yet. That night, I felt afraid for the first time, but I ignored it. I convinced myself it was just jealousy, that he just loved me too much. Time passed and those small things became routine. The control, the cutting silence, the distrustful looks. But I still didn't know. I still didn't realize that the man who once made me feel like the most loved woman in the world would be the same one who would make me wish I had never crossed his path. I still didn't know that the love that once made me smile would transform into my worst nightmare. And when I realized this, it was already too late. Time has a strange way of transforming things. In the beginning, Jason was everything I ever wanted: attentive, passionate, charming. He made me feel safe, loved, special. And I, blinded by love, didn't notice the small signs that were there all along, trying to warn me that something wasn't right. The days with him were intense. When Jason was happy, the world seemed perfect. But when he got irritated, a weight fell over our house. He didn't yell or make a scene, not at first, but I felt something in him change. It started with small criticisms. "You don't need to go out so much. Stay more with me. I'm not sure about this friend of yours. She has a bad influence on you. You don't need to work. I'll take care of everything." At first, I thought it was concern. I thought it was nice. Who doesn't want a husband who worries, who wants to protect? But gradually, I realized I was distancing myself from the world without even noticing. My friends stopped visiting. My outings became rare. My world began to revolve around Jason. I didn't realize that this wasn't attention, it was control. And the control grew into something bigger. The first time I truly felt afraid was on an ordinary night. I was preparing dinner and accidentally let the lasagna burn. Jason came home from work, tired, and as soon as he smelled it, his expression changed. "You can't even cook a decent meal," he said, putting the plate down forcefully on the table. It was just dinner, just a burned lasagna, but his look, the tone of his voice, made my heart race in a way I had never felt before. "Sorry, honey," I said, trying to ease the tension. He remained silent, long minutes of silence while I tried to pretend nothing was happening. That night, I slept facing the opposite side of the bed, feeling a knot in my stomach, not understanding why something so small made me feel so much fear. I thought it would pass, but it didn't. The silences began to grow longer, the words colder. The way he looked at me was no longer the same. Jason would get irritated by small things, and I began to change because of it. I started measuring every word before speaking. I started avoiding anything that might irritate him. I started apologizing for things that weren't even my fault. And then came the first time he lost control. I don't know exactly what happened. Don't know at what moment the man who said he loved me so much began to treat me as someone lesser. It was an ordinary day like any other. He came home with a different look, as if he was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. I just tried to ask how his day was, but he didn't respond. "Jason, did something happen?" He looked at me, but it wasn't a normal look. There was something there, something that made me freeze inside. "You talk too much," he said dryly, coldly. I swallowed hard. I was just worried. And then he slammed his hand on the table with such force that the IKEA glassware trembled. I already said I don't want to talk about it. It was then that I realized that I could no longer be myself. Realized that the man who made me smile also made me feel afraid. After that day, I began to notice the pattern. When he was calm, things seemed to return to normal. But when he got irritated, it was as if a weight took over the house. I walked slowly, breathed slowly, as if any wrong movement could trigger something worse. And inside me, something began to change. The love I felt began to be replaced by fear. The home that once made me feel safe began to feel like a prison. The walls seemed smaller, as if they were surrounding me, as if the air was getting heavier each day. But I still couldn't see a way out. Because despite everything, Jason knew exactly what to say afterward. He would apologize, say he had been stressed, say he loved me, that he would never do it again. And I, naive, wanted to believe. I wanted to believe that he was still the man I fell in love with. But deep down, I already knew that man no longer existed, and perhaps he never had. The silence in that house became deafening. It wasn't the comfortable silence of a peaceful afternoon, or of a couple who understands each other without needing to speak. It was a heavy silence, loaded with tension, with fear, a silence that screamed louder than any word. Days went by, and I began to understand that the love I felt for Jason was no longer the same. It wasn't love, it was survival. Each day, I tried to guess his mood before he even said a word. I tried to predict his thoughts, avoid anything that could trigger that coldness, that empty look that made me feel insignificant. I was gradually nullifying myself without realizing it. Fear became routine. If I already felt afraid, seeing the reflection of this in my children broke my heart. Children perceive everything, much more than we imagine. They sense when something is wrong, even if no one says a word. And my sons, Noah and Ethan, learned while still very young that the house where they should grow up with joy and security was a minefield. They learned to walk quietly, not to speak loudly, not to cry when something hurt them. They learned to interpret the silence, to measure each step, each look. One day, my oldest son, Noah, approached me in the kitchen with his worried little eyes and whispered, "Mom, is Dad angry today?" My heart shattered. They already knew, already understood that there were days when it was better to hide in their room, stay quiet, play without making noise. What hurt me most was knowing that I, as a mother, couldn't protect them. I told them everything was fine, but I knew it wasn't true. I knew. Jason was unpredictable, but he was never completely out of control in front of the children, until that day. It was an ordinary afternoon. Jason came home from work in a bad mood, as usual. I already knew his loaded look, his hard expression, so I tried to keep everything under control. I prepared dinner carefully, avoided unnecessary conversations, kept silent, hoping the night would pass without problems. The children were playing in the living room. It was just an ordinary day. But then my youngest son, Ethan, tripped and knocked over a glass on the floor. The sound of breaking glass filled the house, and in that instant, I knew. Jason got up from his chair so quickly that I didn't have time to react. His eyes fixed on the boy, and his voice, which before was just cold, transformed into thunder. "How many times have I told you to be careful?" The shout echoed through the house like thunder. My son hunched his shoulders. His little eyes filled with tears. Noah, frightened, held his brother's hand. I placed myself in front of them without thinking. "Jason, it was an accident." He looked at me as if he didn't see me anymore. "They don't listen to me. They do it on purpose." And then he threw the chair back and left the house, slamming the door with such force that the window glass trembled. I stood there, hugging the children, trying to calm their fearful sobs. It was at that moment that I realized I wasn't just suffering. I was letting my children grow up in the midst of fear. I was teaching them, without wanting to, that this behavior was normal, and this I could not allow. That night, after the children fell asleep, I stayed awake, looking at the ceiling. For years, I had convinced myself there was no way out, that Jason was my destiny, that I should endure. But now I saw things differently. If I stayed, my children would grow up thinking fear was love. If I stayed, they would learn to nullify themselves, to swallow their tears, to accept the unacceptable. And that was the last thing I wanted for them. I still didn't know how, still didn't know when, but that night, I made the most difficult decision of my life. I was going to leave that house, and this time I wasn't going to return. The decision was made. That night, lying in bed, I felt my heart beat differently. It wasn't the same fear as always. It was something else, a mixture of fear and courage at the same time. I had never truly thought about leaving. For years, I had convinced myself that I had no choice, that my life was that somehow I would be able to endure. But that day, when I saw my children trembling before Jason, something inside me changed forever. There were no more doubts. I needed to leave. The question now was how. I knew I couldn't simply take the children and leave all at once. Jason would notice. He always noticed everything. So I began to plan. That same night, after he fell asleep, I sat by the window and thought about every detail. Where would I go? Who could help me? What would I take? The answer was frightening. I had no one. Over time, Jason had distanced me from everyone. My friends no longer called. My family had become just a memory. That's exactly how he wanted it. But I couldn't let that keep me trapped. So I began to observe everything more carefully. The money that came in, the house keys, the times when he left. Every small detail could be the difference between success and failure.
I want to pause for a moment. If you feel the love and are still listening to my story, please subscribe and hit the like button on the Grandparents Memories channel to show your support. Thank you so much.
I decided I needed to save money. Not much, just enough to take the first step. I began to hide small amounts in places he would never look, inside an old sock, in the back of a forgotten drawer, inside a book he would never open. It was little by little, cent by cent. And as I did this, something inside me began to change. I was preparing for something that had previously seemed impossible. Jason always controlled everything, knew where I went, who I talked to, what I did. So I knew that leaving the house without him noticing would be a challenge. That's when I had an idea. I began to talk about a distant cousin, someone he barely knew about. I made up that she was sick, that she needed help. I think I'll go there in the morning to see how she's doing, I commented, without giving it importance. He didn't react, just nodded, distracted with the newspaper. The next day I repeated it, and the next. I wanted him to get used to that idea for it to sound natural. And then, on Friday, I finally said, I think I'll visit her tomorrow, but I'll be back before lunch. He didn't even look at me. Do whatever you want. My heart raced. This was my chance. That night, I put the children to bed as always, but inside I was in turmoil. I knew this could be my last night there. I hugged each of them for longer than normal, kissed their foreheads, breathed in their sweet scent, listened to their calm breathing. Meanwhile, my heart was racing. I got up slowly, went to the wardrobe and took some clothes. Just the essentials, nothing that would draw attention. I put everything in a small bag, hid it under the bed, and lay down looking at the ceiling. I closed my eyes, but didn't sleep. I couldn't sleep. I knew that the next day everything would change forever. The clock marked 6 in the morning when I got up. Jason was still sleeping deeply. The house was silent. I grabbed the bag, took a deep breath, and went to the children's room. Darlings, wake up. We need to go. They opened their eyes slowly, confused. Where, Mom? I knelt down and held their hands. To a place where you will never have to be afraid again. They didn't fully understand, but they trusted me. We tiptoed out without making noise. Each step was a battle against my own heart, which was beating so hard I thought it might wake Jason. The front door was there, just a few meters away. My fingers touched the doorknob. I held my breath and then turned the key. The door opened. The morning sun touched my face, and for the first time in a long time, I tasted freedom. I didn't look back. Never again. The air that morning seemed different. It had been years since I felt the wind touch my face that way. It wasn't just a cold breeze, it was a breath of life, a breath of hope. I held my children's hands tightly and took the first step outside that house. A step that should have been simple but carried a strength that only those who have lived in a visible prison understand. I didn't look back. I couldn't look back. My heart was beating so hard I could hear it inside my head. My legs were trembling, heavy, but I kept walking. 1, 2, 3 steps without stopping. With each step, I felt as if the weight of years was lifting from my shoulders. But the fear was still there. What if he woke up? What if he realized I was gone? What if he came after me? I didn't have a concrete plan, just the certainty that I couldn't go back. The boys were sleepy, confused, walking beside me without really understanding what was happening. "Mom, where are we going?" my oldest son, Noah, asked. I knelt before them and looked into each of their eyes. "To a safe place," was all I could say because, in truth, I didn't know where we were going. I continued walking. Time seemed to be passing too quickly and, at the same time, dragging on. My body was tired, but my mind remained alert, repeating the same phrase like a mantra. "I can't stop, I can't stop, I can't stop." When I reached a small bus stop, I looked around, trying to calm myself. It was early. The city was beginning to wake up. I saw people going to work, children in school uniforms, the world turning as if nothing was happening. But for me, everything was different. I had nowhere to go. My friends were no longer in my life. My family was distant. I thought about asking strangers for help, but who would believe me? Who would help me? And then I remembered her, a neighbor from many years ago before Jason distanced me from everyone. A woman with a good heart who always told me, "If you ever need anything, come find me." At the time, I thought I would never need it. Now she was my only option. I took the last change I had hidden and boarded the first city bus that passed. Each mile that took us away from the house seemed a relief, but also a burden. It was real. I had fled. When we arrived at her house, I knocked on the door with trembling knuckles. Time seemed to stop until the doorknob turned and Linda Parker's gentle face appeared. She looked at me for a moment and then, before I could say anything, she simply opened her arms. And in that instant, I collapsed. My knees weakened, and for the first time in years, I let the tears fall without fear. I cried. I cried with my whole body. I cried for everything I had kept inside me for so long. I cried for the days of fear, for the forced smiles, for the sleepless nights. I cried for having been weak. I cried for finally having been strong. Her arms held me firmly, as if trying to glue together all the broken parts inside me. "Come, dear, you're safe now." Those words hit me hard. Safe. I didn't even remember what that was anymore. Linda took us inside and prepared hot chocolate. The boys, exhausted, fell asleep on the couch. I looked at them lying there, serene, and it was at that moment that I realized they were sleeping without fear for the first time. They weren't curled up. They didn't have wide eyes listening for heavy footsteps around the house, and that was what made me collapse again. But then fear came like an icy wave. What if Jason found me? He would look for me, and when he realized I was no longer there, I knew he wouldn't easily accept it. That same night, while I was trying to sleep, a phone rang in Linda's house. My heart raced. She answered, and I saw her expression change. Her eyes sought me out, full of concern. "Yes, she is here." My blood froze. I knew it. He had found me. My entire body tensed, waiting for the worst. Linda hung up the phone slowly, turned to me, and held my hands. "He's looking for you." The words were like a blade cutting my skin. My heart seemed to want to leap out of my chest. "Did he say anything?" My voice came out trembling. She took a deep breath. "He said, you have to go back." My mind was spinning. Go back? After everything? After finally tasting freedom? My eyes filled with tears, but this time they weren't tears of fear. They were tears of anger, of indignation, of revolt for everything I had lived through, for everything he had taken from me. And more than ever, I knew I would never go back to that house. But what would I do now? I still didn't know. I just knew that for the first time I was going to fight. In that instant, my heart stopped. I knew Jason wouldn't easily accept my escape, but hearing him say I had to go back made my entire body tremble. Go back? After everything? After finally tasting freedom? My blood cooled and my hands went cold. I looked at my children sleeping on the couch and felt a knot tightening my throat. I couldn't let him take us back to that nightmare. But how could I prevent it? Linda held my hands and squeezed them tightly, looking into my eyes. "You don't have to go back, Emily." Those words made me crumble. For years, I thought I had no choice, that my life was set, that I would have to endure. But sitting there in that house, with fear knocking at the door, I understood something important. I did have a choice. I wouldn't go back, not this time. Linda made me sit on the couch and take a deep breath. She seemed calm, but I could see in her eyes the same concern that burned inside me. "You need to think about what you're going to do now," she said. But my mind was in turmoil. What could I do if Jason already knew where I was? He wouldn't stop until he found me. He never accepted losing control over me. We sat in silence for a few minutes until a horrible thought crossed my mind. What if he was already on his way? My skin prickled. I got up on impulse and ran to the window. My breath caught in my throat as I observed the street. It was empty. But for how long? "Linda, what if he comes here?" She took a deep breath. "If he comes, we won't open the door." But was that enough? Jason was the type of man who didn't accept being ignored. I looked again at my children. They were still sleeping, oblivious to the terror growing inside me. I needed to act before it was too late. Linda picked up the phone and dialed quickly. "I have a friend who can help. She knows a place where you can stay hidden for a while." My heart raced. "Are you sure about this?" She held my hand firmly. "You know as well as I do that you can't give up." I swallowed hard. I knew I would never be truly free if I let Jason believe he had any power over me. And so I made my decision. "Where do we need to go?" She took a piece of paper and wrote down an address. "Take the children and go to this house. It's a shelter for women in situations like yours. There, he'll never find you." My eyes filled with tears. "Are you absolutely sure?" And then, without hesitating, I began to prepare to leave again. I took few things, just the essentials. I hugged my children, trying to hide the nervousness in my voice. "Let's go, my loves. Let's get to know a new place." They yawned and followed me without questioning. Linda accompanied me to the door and held me by the shoulders. "Be strong. You're on the right path." My eyes were full of tears. "Thank you, Linda, for everything. Take care, my dear." And then, with my heart racing, I left into that dark night. Each step was a challenge. Each shadow seemed to be Jason. But I kept walking, kept moving away from what had almost destroyed my life. My heart told me it wasn't all over yet. But for the first time in years, I felt something growing inside me. A strength that Jason had never managed to destroy. And at that moment, I promised myself I would never again be a prisoner of fear. The street was dark, silent. Each step I took seemed to echo inside my head. My children walked beside me, holding my hands, small and innocent, not fully understanding what was happening. For them, this was still an adventure. For me, it was a test of survival. I felt my heart pounding strongly in my chest. Fear made me want to look back every second, but I knew I couldn't hesitate. Jason already knew I had left, and I had no idea how far he would go to find me. As we walked toward the Uber pickup point, my mind wouldn't stop. What if he was already looking for me? What if at that exact moment he was driving through the streets trying to guess where I might have gone? I felt like an animal fleeing from a hunter. I knew that at any moment he could appear. And then, as if my own thought had summoned it, I felt headlights illuminate our backs, the sound of a car approaching. My chest tightened. I squeezed my children's hands. I didn't want to look, but I needed to look. I turned my face slowly. The car passed. It wasn't him. But that simple moment made me feel in my skin what it meant to live in fear. I never knew what freedom was. True freedom wasn't just leaving that house, it was leaving the fear that he had put inside me. When the Uber finally arrived, I took a deep breath and got in with the children. Every small detail seemed surreal. The sound of the engine, the dim lights illuminating the worn seats, the smell of dust mixed with the night breeze. I sat in the back, hugging my children who were already beginning to close their eyes with sleep. As I looked out the window, I saw the city pass by. Each street, each building, each corner that had once been part of my routine, but now was all past. There in that quiet Uber, I was leaving everything behind. I should have felt at peace. I should have felt safe. But the fear was still with me. And then my heart stopped for an instant because I saw a black Dodge Charger passing slowly on the street beside us, and I knew it was him. The car slowed down. My eyes were fixed on it, my chest caught in a knot. It was Jason. I would recognize that car anywhere. And at that moment, it wasn't just a car on the road. It was a shadow trying to pull me back into hell. My entire body stiffened. He couldn't see me there. Not now. I looked at my children. They were sleeping, innocent. I couldn't let that nightmare reach them again. So I did the only thing I could. I ducked down in the seat and prayed he wouldn't see me. The Uber stopped at a traffic light. Jason's car did too. My heart seemed about to explode inside my chest. He was there. I could feel it. My breathing became heavy. If he looked through the Uber window, he would see me. If he saw me, I knew what would happen. The Uber started moving again. The car was left behind. I closed my eyes, feeling a wave of relief mixed with the fear that still wouldn't completely leave me. But I knew he wouldn't give up so easily. I needed to reach the shelter. I needed to disappear before it was too late. When we finally got out of the Uber, I felt my legs wobbling. The address Linda had given me was of a simple house with lit windows and a low iron gate. I hesitated before knocking. What if they didn't accept us? What if there was no space for us? What if... The door opened before I could finish the thought. A woman with a gentle look appeared. It was Angela Wilson. "Are you Emily?" My voice failed. "Yes," she smiled. "Come in. You're safe now." My eyes filled with tears, not from fear, not from sadness, but for the first time in years, from such deep relief that I didn't even know I was still capable of feeling. I took my children in my arms and entered that house. And for the first time in a long time, I felt that I belonged somewhere. I still had a long road ahead, but there, that night, in that house full of stories similar to mine, I knew that Jason would never lay his hands on me again, and that was the beginning of everything. The door of that house closed behind me, and for a second, everything was silent. My feet were on unfamiliar ground, but for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was walking on eggshells.
I want to pause for a moment. If you feel the love and are still listening to my story, please subscribe and hit the like button on the Grandparents Memories channel to show your support. Thank you so much.
I looked around, trying to understand where I was. It was a simple, cozy house. The smell of coffee and homemade muffins came from the kitchen. On the couch, some women were talking quietly, some with tired looks, others with alert eyes, as if they were always waiting for the worst. But what caught my attention most was something I hadn't seen in a long time. An environment where no one was afraid. The woman who opened the door, Angela Wilson, took me to a small room with a simple bed, a wooden wardrobe, and a chair. Here you can rest. It's a safe place. Safety. That word sounded strange to me. For so long, I had lived expecting danger, expecting the next moment of tension, that I no longer knew what it felt like to feel safe. I laid my children on the bed, covering them with a light blanket. They were so tired that they fell asleep in seconds. I hugged my own arms, feeling the night chill still trapped in my skin. And then, for the first time in a long time, I cried. But it wasn't a cry of fear. It was a cry of relief, of accumulated pain, of years of anguish being poured out in silent tears. I hugged my knees and let everything out. The silence of the night enveloped me, and the only sound that filled the room was the echo of the feeling I had never been able to show. But now I was free. The sun came through the crack in the window, and for a moment I felt disoriented. For years, I had woken up with a weight on my chest, a fear of what the day would bring. But that day, I woke up and heard the sound of silence. There were no heavy footsteps in the hallway, no slamming doors, no tension in the air, as if anything could turn into a storm. My children were still sleeping, their little faces serene, without the worry they always carried upon waking. I got up slowly and left the room. In the living room, I found some women sitting around the table having coffee. Some were talking quietly, others just staring into nothingness, lost in their own thoughts. Rebecca Chen, the woman who had welcomed me the night before, smiled at me. "How are you feeling?" I didn't know how to answer. My mind was still confused. My heart still carried remnants of fear. But I took a deep breath and tried to find the words. "Different," I said. She nodded as if she understood exactly what I meant to say. "It will take time, but you'll see. One day you'll wake up and no longer feel afraid." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that one day this weight would leave my chest. But I knew that Jason wouldn't give up so easily. What if he was still looking for me? What if somehow he found me? The fear was still there, like a ghost. That same afternoon, one of the shelter coordinators, Olivia Rodriguez, came to me. She was holding a phone in her hand, and her expression was serious. "Emily, we need to talk." My skin prickled. She sat down beside me and took a deep breath before speaking. "Jason was at the Chicago Police Department, 18th District, this morning." My heart froze. "What did he say?" "He filed a police report saying you kidnapped the children." Nausea rose in my stomach. "Kidnapped? But they're my children." She held my hand. "We know that, but men like him do this all the time. They use any tactic to maintain control." My head was spinning. Jason wouldn't accept losing, and now he was trying to use the law against me. "What do I do?" My voice came out low, almost a whisper. The coordinator smiled slightly, but it was a smile loaded with seriousness. "We're going to help you." I had never known what it was to have real help. But now, for the first time, someone was on my side. After that conversation, my mind was still in shock. But I knew I needed to be strong, not for me, but for my children. That night, as I was putting them to bed, my oldest son, Noah, looked into my eyes and said something that made my heart ache. Mom, are we going to have a real home now? I held back the tears. I ran my hand through his hair and smiled. Yes, my love, we will have a home. He smiled, closed his little eyes, and fell asleep. And I stayed there, sitting beside them, looking at the ceiling, thinking about everything that had happened, thinking about how Jason had tried to break me but failed. I was still there, still breathing, still fighting. And now, for the first time, I felt that the fight was worth it. Freedom doesn't happen overnight. It's not enough to just leave the house. You need to remove the person from inside you, and that was my next challenge. But at that moment, sitting beside my children, listening to the peaceful sound of the night, I knew that for the first time in many years, I was on the right path. I was no longer a prisoner, I was a survivor. And this was just the first page of my new story. The shelter was secure, but physical safety didn't mean my mind was free. I might be far from Jason, far from the house where I spent years walking on eggshells, but the fear was still inside me. It didn't go away just because I crossed the door and said goodbye. It was in my sleepless nights, in the startles at every door slam, in the irrational panic whenever an unknown number called the shelter's phone. As much as the walls of that place protected me, I still didn't feel completely free. And in a way, Jason knew this. Rebecca Chen told me that Jason was trying to find me. He had already been to the police station, had already spread lies about me, had already tried to make the law work in his favor. But he didn't stop there. Days passed, and every time one of the women from the shelter returned from outside, I felt my body tense, waiting for one of them to say the words I feared so much. And then one day it happened. One of them came in, took off her coat, and looked at me with a concerned expression. "Emily, there's a man asking about you outside." My skin went cold. "What do you mean?" She sat down beside me, lowering her voice so the other women wouldn't hear. "I went to Walgreens nearby, and I saw a man asking about a woman with 2 children. My breathing got caught in my chest. Did he see you?" She shook her head. "No, but from the way he was talking, I felt it was him." I closed my eyes. My entire body was trembling. He was close, too close. If he knew where I was, he wouldn't stop until he found me. And if he appeared at the shelter's door, and if he managed to make me go back. The very idea left me breathless. But then something inside me screamed louder. No, not this time. I hadn't gone through all that to let fear drag me back to him. I had left that house to change my story, and I wouldn't let him write it again. I spent the night awake, eyes fixed on the ceiling, my body tired but my mind working at full speed. I had never thought there would come a time when I would feel more anger than fear. But that night was exactly what happened. The anger grew inside me, an indignation I had never allowed myself to feel. Why did he still think he had power over me? Why did he still think he could decide what I would do with my life? I closed my fists and sat up in bed. I couldn't live running away anymore. I needed to act. I needed to end this. And I knew exactly what to do. The next morning, I made a decision I never imagined I would have the courage to make. I asked to speak with Rebecca Chen. When I sat before her, my heart was racing, but my voice came out firm. "I want to file a restraining order against him." She looked into my eyes and smiled slightly. "Are you sure?" I didn't hesitate. "I am." She nodded. "Then we'll help you." It was the first time I felt that someone was truly on my side, that my pain wasn't invisible, that I wasn't alone anymore. That same day I was taken to the Chicago Police Department, 18th District, by an assistant from the shelter. Each step towards that door seemed to weigh tons, but at the same time, I knew it was right. When I sat before the clerk and began to tell my story, I felt as if I was taking a weight off my chest. Word by word, I brought to light everything I had lived through, the years of silence, the fear, the looks that made me tremble, the veiled threats, the moments when I thought I wouldn't survive. And when I finished, the clerk just looked at me and said, "You did the right thing." I left there with a paper in my hands. It was a restraining order. I still felt fear, but that day I also felt something new. I felt that for the first time in a long time, Jason no longer had control over me. I returned to the shelter feeling a lightness I had never felt before. The other women looked at me and noticed I was different. My eyes were no longer downcast. My breathing was no longer short. I still had a long road ahead. There were still wounds that needed to heal. But I knew in that moment that something essential had changed. I was no longer a woman who ran away. I was a woman who fought. And I wouldn't let my past define my future. That night, I lay in bed with my children and hugged them tightly. They were already used to seeing me worried, looking at the door, holding fear inside me. But this time, my oldest son, Noah, looked into my eyes and said, "Mom, are you happy?" The question caught me by surprise. It had been so long since I even knew what happiness meant. But there, in that moment, I realized that yes, I was happy. Not because everything was resolved, not because the fear had disappeared, but because I was finally in control of my own life. And that, more than anything else, was the greatest victory I could have. And this victory was just the beginning. In the days that followed, I began to notice something different. For years, I woke up feeling fear. Fear of what Jason would do. Fear of making a mistake, of saying the wrong word, of breathing the wrong way. But that morning, when the first rays of sun touched my skin, fear wasn't the first thing I felt. I opened my eyes slowly and for a moment, I just lay there, listening to the light breathing of my children beside me. They were calm. They slept without fear. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something I almost didn't recognize. I felt peace. I got up from the bed slowly, trying not to wake the children, and went to the window. The street outside seemed ordinary, like all others. Cars passing, people going to work, neighbors talking about trivialities. But for me, that world was new. For years, I had lived imprisoned in a routine where each step was calculated, where each day was just another survival. Now I could simply go out. I could walk on the street without worrying about what time I should return. I could talk to whoever I wanted without fear of the consequences. I could choose. But at the same time that this liberated me, it also frightened me. What would I do now? How do you start from zero after having lived an entire life in fear? I didn't have all the answers, but for the first time, I wanted to look for them. That same day, Rebecca Chen called me for a conversation. "Emily, now that you're safe, we need to think about the next steps." My hands tightened on my lap. "What are the next steps?" She looked at me with affection. "You need to rebuild your life, and for that, you need to have a place of your own." Those words hit me like a shock, a place of my own. The idea seemed so distant. After everything, would I be able to? But how? "We can help you find a job and a small studio apartment in Logan Square. It won't be anything luxurious, but it will be yours." My heart raced. Work, home, independence. This was everything Jason always told me I couldn't achieve without him. But now I had the chance to prove he was wrong, that he never had power over me, that I was always capable. They just didn't let me see it. In the following days, with the help of the shelter, I began to look for work. It was strange. It was as if I had to learn to live again. The last time I had really worked was before I married Jason. He didn't allow me to work. He said he would take care of everything. But taking care of everything meant controlling everything. Now, sitting before a manager at Sunrise Bakery in the neighborhood, I felt my hands sweating. He read my resume, looked at me, and smiled. "Do you have experience as an attendant?" My voice almost failed, But I took a deep breath. It's been a long time, but I learned quickly. He nodded. You know what I like most in new employees? Willingness. Do you have that? I looked him in the eyes. I had faced hell and survived. I had spent years afraid to breathe, and now I was there, ready to fight for my life. Yes, I do. Then you can start next Monday, September 15th. For a moment, I thought I hadn't heard correctly. Start? The job is yours. My chest filled with a different warmth, joy, pride, freedom. I left the interview and felt tears springing to my eyes. I had done it. I was starting over. That night, I sat with my children on the bed and told them the news. Mom got a job. They looked at me curiously. So we're going to have a real house? Asked my oldest son, Noah. I held his little hand and smiled. Yes, my love. His face lit up and he jumped into my lap, hugging me tightly. I knew you could do it. My heart tightened. For so long, Jason had made me believe I was nothing without him. But there, in that small, loving embrace, I knew I was everything to those boys. And that was enough. With my first salary, I managed to rent a small studio apartment in Logan Square. It was simple. Just 2 rooms, peeling walls, a futon sofa bed. But it was mine. For the first time, I had a place where no one controlled me, where no one told me what to do, what to wear, what to say. The first night there was strange. The silence was different from what I was used to. But when I lay on the futon and saw my children sleeping beside me, I felt a peace I had never felt before. I didn't have anything luxurious, but I had my freedom, and that was worth more than any wealth. In the months that followed, my life transformed slowly but surely. I managed to buy used furniture. We painted the apartment walls together. Each day that passed, the fear became smaller, and a new emotion grew inside me, hope. One day, as I watched my children playing in the living room, I felt a tightness in my chest. But this time it wasn't pain, it was gratitude. Gratitude for having had the courage to leave. Gratitude for having found support. Gratitude for being alive. And above all, gratitude for never having given up on myself.
I want to pause for a moment. If you feel the love and are still listening to my story, please subscribe and hit the like button on the Grandparents Memories channel to show your support. Thank you so much.
Because in the end, freedom wasn't just escaping from Jason. It was finding myself again, and I was just beginning to truly live. Years passed. I could say it was easy, that after I left that house, everything was resolved as if by magic. But the truth is that starting over is a long, painful, and often lonely process. I had days when I looked at my children and wondered if I was doing the right thing, if I could give them a dignified life, if the fear would ever completely disappear. But then I saw their eyes, and in them there was no more fear. There was no more that tense look, that hesitation before speaking, that fear of existing. They were free, and that was the greatest proof that I had made the right choice. For a long time, fear still accompanied me. Even after the restraining order, even after changing addresses, even after rebuilding my life, there were still nights when I woke up startled, with my heart racing, feeling as if Jason was there. But he wasn't anymore. These moments became rarer over time. I realized that fear only has power over us when we feed it, and I decided I wouldn't give it that privilege anymore. So each day I freed myself a little more. With each smile from my children, with each achievement, with each moment I looked in the mirror and saw a strong woman, I was leaving that past behind. I was no longer that broken Emily who believed she had no way out. I was the woman who survived, who fought, and who won. And Jason? He stayed behind. He no longer has space in my story. One day, while organizing the small apartment I had built for me and my children, I found a forgotten box in the back of the wardrobe. Inside were old letters, diaries, small reminders of who I was before Jason. And there, in the midst of everything, I found a folded paper. When I opened it, I immediately recognized it. It was an essay I wrote when I was still a little girl in school. The title said, "When I grow up, I want to help other people find their way." I remembered how, as a child, I dreamed of being an accountant, of doing something that would change people's lives. But over the years, Jason destroyed each of these dreams. He made me believe I wasn't capable, that my only role in the world was to serve him, to be the woman he wanted me to be. But at that moment, holding that yellowed paper, something inside me awakened. I was still alive, and that meant there was still time to dream. As the years passed, I grew, evolved, became stronger. I got a better job, studied, learned new things. And one day I made a decision that would change everything again. I went to the shelter that had taken me in during that most difficult moment of my life. I looked at that simple house where I had once entered destroyed, without direction, without hope, and saw other women arriving, women who, like I once was, carried the weight of fear in their eyes. And it was there that I knew I needed to help. So I began to work as a volunteer, then as a financial advisor for women at the shelter. I began by listening to stories, holding trembling hands, offering a shoulder to those who had no one. And with each woman I met there, I realized that my story wasn't just mine. It was the story of many. And if I had managed to escape, others could too. If I was once saved, now it was my turn to save. Years later, I received unexpected news. Jason had been arrested. He had tried to repeat the cycle with another woman, but this time he couldn't escape the consequences. When I heard this, I felt a mixture of emotions. Not because I desired revenge, but because it proved one thing. He was never as strong as he made me believe. I was the one who was strong. I was the one who survived. I was the one who had the courage to leave. He was just a weak man who thought he could control another person's life. And at that moment, I knew I would never need to look back again. My life was the present and, above all, the future. The woman you would have encountered in my earlier years scarcely resembles who stands before you now. Back then, you'd have met someone vulnerable, directionless, and consumed by trepidation. Peer into my gaze today and witness the transformation. Someone who experienced profound suffering, yet refused to be characterized by it. Someone who, despite everything, maintains faith in the concept of love. Not the kind that confines, not the variety that devastates. Rather, authentic affection, self-compassion, enthusiasm for existence. And most significantly, appreciation for the person I've evolved into. For amid everything Jason succeeded in taking, my fundamental nature remained beyond his reach. It persisted throughout, subdued, wounded, concealed beneath years of anguish, yet never obliterated. Today it radiates with unprecedented brilliance. Should this narrative echo aspects of your own experience, should you feel ensnared in perpetual repetition, should this escape seem impossible, understand that liberation exists. I embody this possibility. If I could break free, so can you. The journey may present challenges. It may require patience. Yet eventually you'll awaken to something other than immediate dread. Eventually your reflection will reveal someone formidable, unfettered, triumphant. Just as I prevailed, just as you possess the capacity to prevail. I appreciate your attentiveness throughout my account. May my experiences offer you a fresh perspective on our world. Today, as I sit here recounting my story, I can't help but feel emotional looking back at the journey I've traveled. Thank you all for patiently listening to my story. A story not just about pain, but about the hidden strength that each of us can find in our darkest moments. I want to send a message to anyone who is listening. True love never makes you afraid. True love doesn't control, doesn't hurt. Real love gives you the freedom to become the best version of yourself. If you're in a relationship that makes you feel small, if you're constantly walking on eggshells, if you no longer recognize yourself, remember that you deserve better. And more importantly, you are strong enough to find a way out. I want to extend a special thank you to the Grandparents Memories channel for giving me the opportunity to share my story. Thank you to the founder for creating a platform where stories like mine can touch the hearts of many. If my story has touched you in any way, please subscribe to the Grandparents Memories channel and leave a like on this video. Each share is an opportunity for this story to reach someone who might need to hear it most. Stay tuned for more stories on the Grandparents Memories channel, where real-life experiences are shared, where life lessons are preserved for future generations. I am Emily Warren, and I believe that life always has brighter new beginnings no matter what you've been through.